Hi, and welcome back to the Kung Fu Book Review. Today we're going to be looking at this fairly hefty tome, Shaolin White Crane. Yeah, the essence of Shaolin White Crane, I should say. Martial Power and Qigong by Dr. Yang Jwing-Ming. Now, Dr. Jwing-Ming, right, he's a fairly major figure in Chinese martial arts in the West. I will go into his background in detail, and I've got quite a few of his different books. I just like to say that he's written a lot of different books, but his first and core martial art is White Crane Kung Fu. And this is why I've chosen this one, because I think that it's one of his better books, because the depth of the knowledge and of the information, the drills, the Qigong sets, and the way that it's presented is, I think, very, very authentic. Now, I'm no expert in White Crane Kung Fu. I've only done a little bit of it. So for a while when I was doing my masters, I was in the States for a bit, and so I did some one style of White Crane, and then when I came back and I was living out in Twickenham in quite far west London, there was a school nearby as well that did Fujian White Crane. So again, I've encountered two of the different lineages, but it was kind of 6 months here, 6 months there, because I couldn't find a good Chinese martial arts teacher. So whilst he has trained with a lot of different lineage holders and of many different White Crane styles, because one of the things that's interesting about this style is really White Crane is like a family of styles. It's got loads and loads of little family styles and slight variations, and like a Shaolin version of it, and then one that's a little bit more fluid, and then some other ones that have this really crazy like Qigong that isn't really found anywhere else, this trembling Qigong. Loads of interesting stuff, and he's one of these guys that's kind of gone around and trained with several different masters of White Crane, and created a synthetic White Crane style, which I think is a great service to the martial arts community. So it's a large book, and it's one of his earlier ones. One of the big issues with this guy is that he sort of churns out. He's written a lot of books, 24 books and 24 videotapes and DVDs and stuff. So there's loads of this stuff, and there's little clips of him on YouTube all over the place. And he's one of these prime offenders of a guy who'll be like, I'm going to do a book on White Crane, and then I'm going to do a book on White Crane Qina, and then I'm going to do a book on White Crane Qigong, and then I'm going to do a book on Tai Chi Qina, right? So once you've read a couple of his books, a lot of the material is repeated. But the reason why I picked this one first of all is because one, it was his original primary art and his main focus for many years, where he trained sort of extensively in that style. Because he's later on, he's gone on to do other internal styles, Tai Chi and stuff. But his and also it's one of these earlier books where he really, is trying to really get in there and sell the book. So it wasn't so commercial at this point, because there's loads of really good content in this book. So it's got a little subtext down here: the foundation of White Crane Kung Fu and the root of Okinawan karate. Now again, with some of these earlier books, so when was this one first published? When was that? I think 80s originally, and then I've got the reprint from 1994. Obviously, so that you've got this weird thing that I've mentioned before with Earl Montague, is that some of the books that were sort of in the 80s, early 90s, karate was just so much more dominant then. So like when I first started training, it was in karate and judo, because that was all there was. So there was a market, there was this weird thing in the market where they would try and adapt Chinese terms and infiltrate the sort of the karate essence, right? But he actually has a legitimate claim to this because the history of some of the southern styles of Okinawan karate involve white crane and tiger style lineages from China, sort of mitigating over there and then mingling with the indigenous karate, sort of empty-handed fighting styles to create karate, which originally was karate Chinese hand, right? So, and then they changed, a guy called Ginshin Funakoshi changed the symbol, the character for it, to the empty hand, which was a very clever piece of artifice on his part. Right, so aside from that as a selling point for the book, he doesn't really focus on that and then just leap straight into all of the content. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Dr. Yang Jwing-Ming, right? So Dr. Yang. So he's a Chinese mainlander. So this is important because a lot of the first generation of Chinese guys that came over, especially in the UK, but then also to the Pacific coast of the US, were from Hong Kong, right? And he is not one of those. So that is interesting in itself because he brings, and I think his books are generally done quite well in this regard, he brings knowledge and scholarship of the full of the Mandarin pronunciations and the simplified way of writing plus pinyin. So one of the weird what I would say artifacts of Chinese that you get from Hong Kong and southern Chinese people is that it's the Cantonese speech, which obviously sounds completely different, but then also the characters are the non-simplified, they're the traditional characters, and also they do now, but back when they originally came over they didn't really use pinyin because that was a sort of a mainlander thing to try and encourage to sort of simplify the way that Chinese was taught. So when those guys pinyin serves as a natural bridge for understanding for a Westerner how to actually pronounce Chinese characters. So you get this double whammy that the Chinese characters don't get translated into a form that a Westerner with a Cantonese author and to a lesser extent with a Taiwanese author, they don't get translated into the pinyin. They don't get translated into a form that a Westerner can say out. So they don't learn the words, and then they learn the pronunciation of the Cantonese terms, which they often don't have the skills to pronounce because of the complexity of Cantonese in terms of its many tones. So that's why, if you look at Wing Chun, which I've done loads of, it's kind of weirdly hilarious that Wing Chun has this huge array of ways of saying words that are just not Cantonese, right? In the Western, it's almost taken on its own Kung Fu language, which is like a bastardized version of Cantonese that Westerners can pronounce. So I'd like to thank him for being one of the guys that actually has helped to sort of settle this and give, easy to read pinyin that people can say, oh, I know how to say that, right? I know how to say that word. I can spell it out. And then trying to standardize it a little bit it's not anyone's fault. It's just a sort of unhappy accident, like I said, an artifact of the way that Chinese was taught and transmitted in sort of Canton province. Anyway, that was a huge aside. So he's a he's a mainlander. He trained in white crane kung fu for many years down in southern China, right? And he trained with a renowned master and then several other senior students and masters from different lineages, right? So that's why he was able to and he's picked up a few different forms from each of these different styles of white crane. Then he kind of went to Chinese university and learned a bit of long fist, I think, and some other styles. So sort of, again, as you do when you're traveling, and I've done this the same, like when I've been at different stages of my education, you move and then you try and you just pick up whatever's there and you just learn it. And he did Tai Chi for a while as well. And then he went, and I think he was a physics grad, and then he went over to the States and did a PhD in engineering. Never went back because, you know, why would you go back to China at that stage, right? When everything was kind of going a bit ropey before it opened up and got better. And then now maybe it's getting slightly worse again. But yeah, it's, you know, so he stayed over there. I think he was at Purdue University, did mechanical engineering, only spent a few years, like 6 years. That's kind of similar to me, for a few years out in the working world before he was like, maybe I'm just going to do Kung Fu full time, right? And then he became a full-time martial arts instructor, and he's had a bunch of schools, tons and tons of books. He's very, very prolific in the writing and tapes department, DVDs, now on YouTube and other places. He's got quite a lot of students. I'd say that one of his areas of expertise is Qina, which is the grabbing and seizing art, so kind of like jiu-jitsu, Chinese jiu-jitsu, basically. So the sort of standing, grappling and joint locks. Yeah, so that's his background. So obviously he has a pretty good pedigree. He seems like a decent martial artist, and his movement quality seems all right. I mean, you know, pretty damn good. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say, because I've never trained with him directly. I'm not gonna badmouth anyone in the martial arts community, but yeah, there are some other interpersonal rumours which I will not confirm or deny. But I've never met him, so I've never trained directly with him, so I refuse to comment on any of that stuff. You can go and read on the internet if you want to. Yeah, so I think this is, as I said, I'd say this is one of his better books. He's also one of these guys that comes from this Chinese engineering background and very solid Chinese mindset. So you get this kind of like Chinese production of books. It's not so bad, like it's not like the Master Joe book, but you get this very strange use of, which seems to be something that is inherited from Chinese, strange use of bold and italics, which I do not find is particularly consistent. You know, so he'll italicize Mandarin terms, which is fine. So I think that's fairly there. But then he'll also sort of randomly bold individual phrases. So why would you do that? So you've got bold italic for Yi Jing. So that's a Mandarin phrase, but it's been bolded there. But then also he bolds certain parts of sort of 4-character phrases. But then also, for example, you'll get, you know, the natural way in inverted commas here, right? So, but also bolded, but then not italicized because it's not a Mandarin term. So, it's fine. There is some sort of logic to it, but it's generally not the way. For a Western author, it comes across as a bit, a Western reader, it comes across as a bit strange. He also is a big fan of this Chinese engineering guys. He's a big fan of these kind of bizarre, almost engineering-like diagrams. So you get like velocity charts and these kind of things throughout the book. That's okay. I think it gets better when he actually just moves on to away from some of that stuff and gets into the practical instruction. Because his point, so whilst he does do a little bit of, you know, the black and white stills, he actually does I think he's one of the better authors for presenting black and white still photographs, because he provides sufficient number of panels. They're generally to describe and explain a particular movement or basic drill, which is something I'll come on to later, which is a real strength of this book, is the fundamentals. And then he provides additional information like lines, and then lots and lots of text and information, which you can generally find. He's also quite good at producing these sort of like fairly appropriate flow lines, so you kind of know what's going on. It's not great, it's still a bit difficult. But for learning a static pose, for example, so you know, so he's going to talk about, let's say, chapter 5, he talks about hard qigong, right? And he's got some awesome proper kung fu drills in here, you know, so like doing standing meditation on a pair of upturned bricks, for example, Yeah, that's the real deal, you know. And so learning how to root and have structure by standing on wobbly bricks. So overall, I think if you're doing White Crane Kung Fu, this is almost a must buy, I would say. I think it's that good. Like I've only got a handful of White Crane books because, like I said, I only bought it when I was training actively for about a year. But I still use a couple of the drills, and I've also kind of pinched a few drills from it to use with my Wing Chun guys, because I think White Crane Kung Fu, again, just the smaller side, White Crane Kung Fu has much more sophisticated Qigong than at least the basic Ip Man sort of three forms Wing Chun that most people know. And you'll see guys nowadays like Sifu Sergio and a couple of others, the guys that have all these soft style Wing Chun that's a lot more internal, sort of nicking bits and bobs from Southern White Crane, because Wing Chun is kind of, it's in the White Crane family. So I also do that, right? So I've nicked a couple of Qigong drills, some standing and some other things that I use to teach my Wing Chun students. So, yeah. Good. Right, so let's talk about, if it's there, I also would recommend it to a Wing Chun practitioner, honestly, as well, because, as I said, there's some really good basic Gong Fu drills in this book, which I think is applicable to most sort of internal / external martial artists. If you're solidly focused on like Tai Chi, Xingyi and Bagua, then don't worry about this book. Okay, so let's go through and find the contents page. Do we have a contents page here somewhere? Okay, yeah. So at the start you get, because again showing his academic criteria, you got 12 pages of prefaces and about the authors and acknowledgements and very nice pictures of some old black and white stills of his old grandmaster, his old teacher, right, this guy. Also doing some of the big old traditional weapons there. Yeah, halberds and stuff like that. Awesome, Guandao. Because White Crane, some of the White Crane family styles also have tons of like spear, staff, various different lengths, and the Guandao as well. Good. So yeah, so 10 page. So let's just have a good look here. So have a look at the contents page. You can see it goes on quite a bit. So we've got part one. So it's very logical and well structured, this book. Even though it does pick up a little bit of that Chinese typography, the writing is quite clear. So for a Chinese author, because obviously he's done his PhD in the West, so he can write very well in English. Well, most of us people with PhDs think we can write at least okay, right? So you got 3 chapters about Chinese martial arts, about Chinese Qigong, and about White Crane martial arts in particular. The general Chinese martial arts bit is fine. You'll probably find that in many books. The Qigong bit is quite interesting. He takes... I think people take a very definitive take on Qigong, and they tend to just be like whatever their teachers taught them, that's their narrow mindset of it. So because he's a good example of someone that Bruce Francis would put in the sort of fire tradition. So he does a lot of the microcosmic orbit and using the mind to directly work with energy channels and sort of forcing it to happen, as opposed to the more Tai Chi water tradition, what Bruce Francis would call the water tradition, which is sort of the dissolving practice and just standing and a lot more meditation, and the aim to get to Taoist philosophy. Whilst he kind of comes more from that, either I'd say sort of the Buddhist or martial side. So he has a kind of fixed view of like, you do this, then do this, then do this. I think, in my view, there's just a big mix and people like categorizing things, but they're all guys that just went away and trained, and some people got good at certain things and then they developed that into their style. So I think you should be able to pick and choose your Qigong styles. And don't worry about people telling you, do this method or this method, right? Have a go and see what you think. Saying that, some of the most extreme forms of Qigong are found in White Crane Kung Fu, and I would hazard against some of them in particular. In particular, the shaking gong, because a lot of people that train that for long periods of time end up with various health problems. I will come back to that later on, and I don't think he does enough in this book to say, oh, maybe don't do this. In fact, anyway. It's part of my thing is that I like to always, when I'm presenting exercises, if I'm writing a book at the moment, what the kind of risk to reward ratio is. And that one is, I think it's too high on the risk to reward ratio. And then one of my favorite bits almost of this book, maybe the basic exercises later. Chapter 3 is really good anyway, about white crane martial arts, because he's done loads of stuff. So he talks about all the different arts that are related to it, the theories of southern white crane styles, the ancestral lineages of white crane, and all of their little 4-character and 8-character training phrases. Just an awesome section that, just again, when you're reading, you're like, oh man, I want to do that awesome flapping wing style of, and some of the names in white crane kung fu are ace. Like, I'll see if I can dig some up. So you've got styles related. He talks a little bit about the other styles. So you've got ancestral crane, then you've got flapping crane, eating crane, shouting crane fist. That's an awesome one with all of the yelling techniques. 5 ancestors, which quite a few people know in the West nowadays. And leaping crane, which is all this like jumping gong and stuff, and like flapping and stuff, and high flying kicks. So like crazy, interesting list of styles, and like some of them sound like they've come right out of Kung Fu Panda, which is great. So then part 2 is the Qigong section. I think there are better books out there on Qigong, but the fact that this comes in a complete package with tons of other training advice just makes it really strong. He gets pretty nitty gritty, and by the way, that's 100 pages of general concepts and history, right? And I particularly like the last 20 or 30 pages about white crane in particular. Chapter 4, the theory. It's about 20 pages of Qigong theory, which let me just refresh my mind of how I thought about it. It was okay. It was like I said, it was like an engineer that wrote it. So it comes across as a bit overly structured in my view. But he makes the division between hard and soft Qigong, which I think is fair and accurate. Right, now you get onto the really good bits of the instructional components, because he does chapter 5 and chapter 6 are hard Qigong and soft Qigong. And this is great because he just gives you a series of basic exercises that you could incorporate into any style, right? And Chinese martial arts, Southern Chinese martial arts style in particular. So like one-legged standing, right? So, start off just standing on one leg, then stand on one leg on a brick, then do this crazy flying crane position on a brick, right? And so they've got nice progressions, which is really good. I think that's useful because you can start slow and build it. And then he's got like stand on 2 bricks, it's great. And stuff like bridges, so he's got a reverse plank there, which is a really solid move, underutilized move. Fingertip push-ups, all types of grabbing and twisting where you're doing different kind of hand spirals. Just loads of good stuff. Back opening exercises, kind of like the white crane equivalent of like silk reeling exercises, except they tend to be like single joint. So you'll do like this kind of thing where you'll open and close the chest. So you're developing that, the ability for this back open and close to drive a hand movement. Great drills, like really good drills. And I think that's one of the nice things that separates it from from Wing Chun, right? So in Wing Chun, you're all going to learn this wonderful structure here, but until you get later on, like the Bilji, and then even then it's not that much, you're not really going to be doing this kind of what we would call opening and closing in internal martial arts, but that is in White Crane Kung Fu, and it's kind of explicitly brought in from the beginning. Yeah, brilliant section, and there's tons of them. There's just loads and loads of drills, which I think is great. And then his soft qigong, he focuses on standing meditation and abdominal breathing, and then he goes on he does some loose stretching as well. So he categorizes that. He does a little bit of repetition, so he'll do a closed fist movement and say that's hard qigong, and then he'll do the same, like, so like if it was like a hard knocking punch where you're doing like this and you're drilling this movement, he'll do the same and say this is soft qigong. So there's a little bit of repetition. Lots of arm swings for generating loose heavy power, which I think are brilliant drills, and he's got a huge variety of different types of arm swings, which I think is cool. And is one of the things that White Crane really specializes in, actually. So similar to if you're a Wing Chun student, you've got these sections in the Bilji where you swing the arm. White Crane has these in all sorts of funny hand positions and angles, right? So you're hitting these arm swings with little corkscrew movements, one swing and then the other one, and all this kind of thing. So you're generating loads of springiness and tendon strength. Good. Then he goes on to Jin. So he separates Qigong, he separates Qi and Jin very distinctly as well. So Qi being your sort of energy, well-being, the amount of force that you've got within you, and then Jin is the expression of that through some sort of martial skill. Again, I think that's fine. That's a good way of summarizing that up. And then he goes into sort of Jin. So these are much more how to apply these methods with an opponent a lot of the time. So for example, let's just pick one. So like squeezing Jin, right? So this is one of the other things that's distinctive, and I find in White Crane and some of the southern or central Chinese martial arts, is they focus on the 10,000 types of Jin. So it's like, this is squeezing Jin, this is pressing Jin, this is flapping Jin, this is whatever, right? Rather than the internal martial arts are just like, just get better at emitting power, right? They just call it Fa Jin, explosive force. It's like, don't worry about all that other stuff. Like, just focus on, quality of movement and expression of power. But these sort of mixture internal, external martial arts really, really focus on the 10,000 different types. So if you talk about squeezing Jin, he's talking about how you can compress, right? So you're going to provide force in two directions like this. So you're going to do an open and then a close, and everything compresses together. So you're going to concussively, like this could be like a wham, smack someone's both ears at the same time, like cupping like that. That's a type of squeezing Jin, right? Because the force is arriving in both directions at the same time. And so he'll break that down. He'll give you a little drill. So like, for example, that one, there might be an open and close drill where you really exaggerate it, a slow one, and then a more explosive one. And then he'd be like, grab a partner or a pad and wham, have a go at doing that, which is a really good teaching method. So yeah, I think it's excellent. All the rest of this book, good stuff. And he does lots of Qi-Na, lots of kicks, and tons of different types of strikes. One point of caution, he talks about trembling Jin, the shaking Jin, and he gives you a drill for how to do it without sufficient warnings, I think. I would say read some of Bruce Francis's stuff about some of the practitioners that do a lot of this happen. I think that's all I've got to say about it, because it's there are much better ways to get to that same, to be able to get that sort of springy Fa Jing, body wave. There are much better, smoother ways that are more health generating than the method that this style purports to do. So we don't really know what the mechanic of it is. Like, it might be something to do with the brain wobbles around inside the cerebrospinal, inside the fluid inside the brain. So you get the same sort of effect as like a boxer's punch drunk when it seems very similar. So the guys that have been doing it for many years, they seem to get that same set of increased violence, alcoholism. It looks to me, again, this is just hypothesizing, to be the same set of symptoms. So maybe that when you're doing this shaking Jin, where you do this, you're actually rattling the brain around inside and slowly causing this sort of punch drunk damage to the brain over time. So yeah, so I agree with Bruce Francis on that, but it's almost like a core Jin method of some styles of white crane. So be cautious, okay? Good. So yeah, and I think that was about it. Anything else at the end? Yeah. So yes, should talk about it. So he sums up a little bit at the end, 1 page, and then he does a good job of a glossary of Chinese points. And look, each phrase is the Mandarin, the character, and a translation with explanation. Bravo, sir. Yeah, that's good. That's a good way to do it, because actually you'll read that and you'll be like, okay, Fujian province. Okay, I kind of know how to say that. Okay, that's the character. A province located in southeast China. Okay, that's where Fujian province is, right? So you'll actually learn what these Chinese terms mean and also how to pronounce them, because the pinyin is roughly, I'd say go and look at 1 or 2 videos on YouTube about how to do pinyin. But it's pretty similar to the Western pronunciation, excepting a few characters. Yeah. And then at the very end, you get a good 15-20 pages of those, an index with everything looked up, and then of course all of his long list of other books. Good. Yeah, if you're doing White Crane, get this book. White Crane Kung Fu, to get this book. If you're doing Wing Chun, I think it's a good shout, right? Especially if you're an instructor who might be looking for some more drills to do during lockdown. Some good ideas in here. Yeah. If you're doing, like I said before, if you're doing Tai Chi and other stuff, don't worry about it so much. Yeah. Let me know if you want to review any of his other books. I have quite a few of them. So, yeah, not all of them are as good as this one. Good. Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing about what you think about the book reviews and how your training is going. It'd be cool if there are any people out there that are doing White Crane that would like to chat about it, because I do miss it sometimes. I think it's an interesting and cool Kung Fu style. Good. I will see you soon. Please like, comment and subscribe. It helps the channel grow, and thank you very much for listening. See you soon.